The NBA Summer League is now complete, and the Philadelphia 76ers roster was one of the more impressive across the Las Vegas Summer League. Had a chance to take it in person myself, and the guy that clearly stood out to me the most was Ricky Council IV. So in this video, I'm going to break down a little bit about what I saw from him, both the good and the bad, as well as speak about what his outlook is on this Sixers team this year. Now, still a little bit of a blank canvas as the Sixers have one roster spot remaining. And I do think Ricky Council is a guy who'll be watching that spot quite carefully. He is already on a standard contract. I'm not saying that this is a guy who is at risk there. What I'm saying is if there is not a guy who is brought in as a real deal high level rebounder or perimeter defender, I think that's an avenue in which Ricky Council IV has an opportunity to grab that role on the Sixers team. Now, those aren't areas that I would consider the number one strengths in his game, but it clearly is a need for the Sixers team. And I do think he is a skill set that could translate. But for the time being, I do want to talk about what I saw from him in Las Vegas. I do think he was head and shoulders the best player on the Sixers team, and that is a huge positive there. I also thought we saw him step up into a real leadership role, which was really cool. He ultimately was pretty close to that too good for Summer League type category, which is exactly what you're hoping for a guy who's been in the NBA, who's played real deal NBA minutes, and you can see the difference. And for what it's worth, there's other guys on this team that did not see that. And to throw a guy under the bus here, a guy like Tony Bradley is a dude that did not have that feeling. And now, granted, on very different trajectories for their career at this point. But you look around the league on other summer league rosters as well, it was not always this translation like we saw from Ricky Council, who's only has 1 year of NBA experience under his belt. There were far more experienced. A guy like Jeff Doughton certainly had that same feeling where you could tell he'd played some NBA basketball already, a little bit of a polish or a savvy in his game in that way. But it was cool to see Ricky be the primary force. And what's been particularly interesting to me about Ricky Council IV is when you think about what his best skills are as a player, which I would consider obviously his athleticism, his dunking, the way that he can get to a free throw line, which I would consider the number one skill in his game, those were all on full display. But what's surprising or I guess strange to me about that is those are really not the skill sets that you consider or think of when you're looking at guys in his role. That people that are more of the role players or the complementary pieces to the stars, it's more about the perimeter shooting, perimeter defense, things like that. And those aren't quite the areas where Ricky's standing out. And I will say, to put my downside of what I saw from him in Las Vegas, there was a little bit too much Ricky Council ball that I did see. Now, granted, I love that this is his opportunity to do that, and there's no other place where it will be. There was a little bit of that with Delaware Blue Coats last year as well. The things that I can do without is kind of the heat checks, the step back threes. But in all honesty, the fact that he has the confidence to take those should still be looked at as a positive. I do think the 3-point shot is still improving, a bit of a work in progress. The shooting form still looks a little bit weird to me. It's a little bit too much two-hand on the basketball for my liking. But if it goes in, it goes in, and I do think he's improving in his efficiency categories there. The free throw line, he's basically automatic from at this point, which is a big deal because once again, that's an area of the floor that he gets to really well. I was a little disappointed last season with the full Sixers team and the lack of opportunity that Ricky Council IV did see. And for reference, even dating back to like that New York Knicks series, which of course bounced the Sixers out of the playoffs, I thought that was a great opportunity to give this guy a chance. And I'm not saying he would have swung the series in its entirety, but what I could have seen be very effective is just throwing him out there and saying, stop letting Josh Hart get 25 rebounds per game. That's something that I think Ricky Council IV could do. And on the other side of things, as I talk about the lack of rebounding for this Sixers team, there's a world where Ricky Council IV can establish himself as a Josh Hart type role on this team. And particularly where I see that, he had a number of impressive putback slams. And I don't know if that's always going to translate in the same direction at the NBA level, but the fact that he's attacking the glass with that type of ferocity and skying for them in the way that he does on just about an every possession basis is a really good sign. So I can see him making an impact on the offensive glass for sure. I would like to see it with that Sixers team immediately. Now, when kind of shaping up the depth chart and how this team looks, it will be interesting. As I've been kind of one of the main messages, and I know one of the biggest concerns among Sixers fans, there isn't really a true power forward on the Sixers team. That primarily is going to be Caleb Martin in that starting role. And while I do think that he can obviously punch up in his weight in regards to guarding guys that are bigger than him and a guy that will absolutely throw his body around and be physical, he's definitely not a guy who has that size, measured around that 6'5", 6'5" type or 6'6" type category. Ricky Council, a bit in the same lane. I think he's even a couple inches shorter than that, or looks it at least. I think he's listed about the same, but I would guess that he's a little bit below that. But he has that same kind of mentality that he's willing to put his body on the line, use that physicality, and he does have a level of athleticism that even a guy like Caleb Martin can't quite reach there. So if he can establish himself, and the other guy that's kind of in the same running is KJ Martin, that's going to be an interesting battle to watch. Now, what Ricky Council IV has in his favor is it's very clear that KJ Martin's contract was signed with the intention of being traded. That balloon deal, which we've talked quite a bit about and has been a popular term in terms of the Sixers world, the same exact contract that Josh Okogie was handed with the Phoenix Suns out there, with the intention of attaching draft picks to it and flipping that for a win now piece. That is the expectation with KJ Martin. And the other side of things, that Ricky Council's still on that rookie contract. So not quite as much bargaining, not as much of a bargaining chip as you can do. And these are all coming into place in so much like clear display because of the CBA, because of the constructs that teams are having to operate with. So I do think from in the long run, if there's not a massive difference between these two, the Sixers are very clearly going to choose Ricky Council over KJ Martin. And frankly, he would be the player that I preferred as well. I actually did like what I saw from KJ Martin last year. He was a player that grew on me throughout the year. I was pretty anti KJ Martin for a good part of the season, but I think he did a really nice job of figuring out the way to fit on this team. Particularly, I thought he was pretty impressive as out of the short role, a guy with some real deal high level athleticism as well. And he's still only 23 years old. So while KJ Martin has had kind of a unique path around the NBA at this point, I think honestly, because he's Kenyon Martin's son, that he was a little bit more accelerated in the process. I know we've seen that in plenty of other opportunities, and it's in full display. Was an NBA Summer League with Bronny James and LeBron James right there. That if it's a different last name on the back of their jersey, we're probably talking about a different path. If it does lead you to the NBA, I think KJ Martin falls in a little bit of a similar world there. And obviously, Kenyon Martin is not LeBron James, but KJ Martin was a guy that was forced at an accelerated path more so than probably should have been the case. That he did not go to college. He played in one of these developmental teams, or a team that a showcase team that he was supposed to prove himself. Did not quite play itself out the way that it is. But the point being that there's still a lot of growing to do in his basketball game. Think about it, he's the same age as Tyrese Maxey at this point in time. And that is an appealing factor when you bring in the trade conversation as well, because a team can buy themselves into the potential that he surely still has. I don't want to write KJ Martin off. Like, there is a world where he improves as a three-point shooter, and all of a sudden he's a really good NBA player. Before Ricky Council IV, there's a little bit more than what I see with KJ Martin, that I think the athleticism is kind of similar, but there's just more of an aggression in the way that Ricky Council IV plays the game, and more of a confidence that I see. That I think KJ Martin is always going to be a little bit more of those complementary players, that there is going to be moments in which Ricky Council IV can take over the game. And I do think that's very valuable from a bench piece when you can bring that type of spark. Guys that do a lot with a little opportunity really stand out. And that's what we saw from Ricky Council IV throughout all of last year. The play that continues to stick out in my head is against the San Antonio Spurs, in which he has that wraparound pass to Nico Batum, one of the more impressive passes that I've seen from any player. And that was at a crucial moment in that game. And that specific Spurs game, which went to overtime and the Sixers ultimately got the win, they do not get that result without Ricky Council IV doing what he did on the floor. So there's a lot at stake for Ricky this year. It will be interesting to see what type of opportunity that he does get. But for what it's worth, when thinking back to what a slam dunk this was, getting this guy as an undrafted free agent, he has a real chance to carve out a niche on the Sixers team. And I will be rooting for the guy. That I do think he's one of the more likable prospects on this Sixers team. It's also really interesting to me that even dating back to his Arkansas day back in college, take a look at that roster, that there's a lot of talent, a lot of NBA talent on that team. Anthony Black, who's kind of carved out a nice niche for himself down with the Orlando Magic. Nick Smith Jr., who was a first-round pick. Jordan Walsh, who I thought really looked good in Summer League for that Boston Celtics. And I am scared to admit that I think he's going to terrorize the Sixers team just a couple years down the line. But Ricky Council IV was the leading scorer on that roster, with three guys that were drafted ahead of him as he went undrafted. I do think teams doubted his ability to still make an impact in a more minimized role, but I think that that is going to be the next question that he has to answer, and I'm a little bit more optimistic about that than I once was. So he absolutely is going to have to adjust his style and play a different way than was the case, but I do think that he's well liked within the locker room. And to give another example of that, at Tyrese Maxey's press conference following his extension, that he mentioned that he's already reaching out to Ricky Council IV, trying to get him to come work out, which I think is a great sign for a lot of reasons. Number one, because Tyrese Maxey's taken on that type of leadership role, and number two, because Ricky Council IV has that belief from Tyrese Maxey. That is not just an empty offer. The fact that he's going out of his way to invite him, he's not saying that if he doesn't believe the guy can't help, can't get better, or isn't an important part of this Sixers team. So I do like that he's around this team. I'm very intrigued to see what he can bring on the floor this year. But he is a guy that I think there's going to be a lot at stake for as far as his future. And in the short term, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of role Nick Nurse looks to use him in. So as far as characteristics, I would like for him to improve on a little bit going into this year. He can develop a little bit as a playmaker. I did see a lot of tunnel vision from him in Las Vegas, and I do attribute a little bit of that to the setting and kind of the understandable selfishness that guys tend to play with as they're competing for their basketball careers. But when we get to the real stage and on the NBA level, you're not going to be able to drive against 2 and 3 guys. And as much as like I compliment the way that he attacks the rim, the relentless aggression that he plays with, there are moments where you just got to be a little bit more passive and make the right basketball play rather than just trying to hang in the air for longer than your defender so you can get one up through contact. And in Ricky's credit, he's very good at that. It's not something that like it's an interesting skill that he's certainly found a way to somewhat master, but there are going to be opportunities which when you make it, it works. But when you don't, you look really bad about it. So need to reel it in a little bit. That's kind of my message to Ricky Council heading into the standard season is just make sure you're playing the right way of basketball. We've seen the crazy. We saw your showcase. We've seen everything you can do now. Now let's find a way to translate that to that win. Find a way to translate that to a winning formula for basketball, which is the only way I see him getting around 4 minutes from the early going. So I don't expect a ton from Ricky in the early moments of the season. But we know how the NBA grind goes, that injuries occur, opportunities pop up. And when that happens, that's going to be Ricky's moment to shine and grab onto a roster spot. I think an ideal season for him would be to be a fringe rotation player to start. And by the end of the year, really carve out that you are a guy that's guaranteed that 10 to 15 minutes and maybe a little bit more on those special nights. If he can find a way to crack the regular rotation this season, that would be a massive success for Ricky Council. But regardless, I still believe in this guy in the long term. And again, an absolute slam dunk to get him in that undrafted free agent market. So we'll see how things shake out from here. But I would consider Ricky Council IV one of the biggest winners of Vegas Summer League. That he absolutely certified himself as an NBA level talent and is a guy that will potentially have a significant role on this Sixers team. Let me know what you guys think about Ricky in the comments. Make sure you're dropping a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. We're going to have a bunch more coming out on PickSwap Media, so make sure to keep it locked to this. I'll be talking with you next time. Peace.